I thank you all for joining this workshop with Robeco. After probably what you've also found to be an interesting introduction into the day, into ESG, into how the Philips Pension Fund is doing it, and the panel discussion that we've seen earlier. The interesting thing that Arjan also brought up was to approach ESG in two kind of ways. One, a value-based approach to ESG. What are your values? Do you want to invest into things or not? But on the other side, a return-based approach into ESG, which they let up to the managers to decide. So the asset manager is to come up with an investment strategy and then determine whether or not and how he will make additional returns or reduce the risk of the investment portfolio that way. And I think this workshop will be a very interesting case example of that, of how to implement that from a return perspective. And to present the workshop, we have Nicolas Beneton, CFA, charter holder as well, to present the work that Robeco is doing. We would like to keep this as interactive as possible. So I might ask some questions in between of the presentation. You're free to ask questions as well, so that we can try to learn as much as possible from the setup that you have and the experience that you have as well, because Robeco some have been doing this for a very long time. But I'll leave the details up to you, because you probably know much better than I do. So.
Well, we'll see. Thanks, Rens, and thanks to you all. My colleagues, Jeremy, Thierry, and myself, are glad that you're here to listen to us, also discuss with us, hopefully. We hope this can be as interactive as can be. If you have congratulations to make, please make them on the spot. Skepticism also is very much welcome. It's always interesting to have different feedbacks. We participated to a similar event in Geneva. Very interesting discussions, unexpected questions. That's what we are here for. Just a quick word on myself. I'm based in Paris, where I work for Robeco France as a sustainability specialist. I like to be honest and transparent which side I'm in. And we're going to address quant investing, sustainability investing. So I'm coming from sustainability investing, and address the quant case for sustainability. Could have been the other way around, that a quant guy could have come to you and talk about sustainability. That's not what you'll have today. Okay. To start with, I'd like to give you a bit of background and answer this very simple question: is why do we do that? Why do we not just tell you about how smart we are in running quant portfolios, because we are smart indeed, that we have these dozen analysts in Zurich, also in Rotterdam, taking care of sustainability. The rationale is very simple here, is the message we want to deliver today, and the rationale for integrating ESG criteria to any kind of investment that we run at Robeco and Robeco SAM, is that just pure accounting cannot tell the whole story. You cannot judge a book by its cover. You cannot give a value to a company with just financial statements. That's our core belief. So you have to take into account what we call intangibles. Having said that, is there a red line between accounting and intangibles? Probably not. The thing that our core belief is that if you only integrate accounting statements, then you miss the point, or you miss part of the point, to say the least. So I like also to make here the difference between what we call internally the blue team, the green team. I have the blue team based in Rotterdam, our headquarters at Robeco. Robeco started integrating intangibles and ESG criteria in its standard. You will understand that coming from the sustainability field, I don't really like to talk about mainstream, about normal portfolios or about standard portfolios, as opposed to sustainable portfolios. For people like me, you take the whole thing or nothing, but for today, to keep as simple as can be, let's call that standard portfolios. Started integrating ESG You will not be surprised under Dutch pension funds pressure. And then it developed for the past few years, mostly started in the fixed income. We will not touch upon fixed income too much today, but please, if you have any question, do not hesitate. And then to equity funds, both fundamental and quant. Quant, most recently, I will get to it in a minute, because it's a different story there. With the help of Robeco SAM. I hope most of you are familiar with Robeco SAM, which was created as SAM, SAM standing for Sustainability Asset Management. The name could have been worse. And the company was created in 1995 in Zurich on the ground that just investing as per accounting statements is not right, that you have to get some more data to take more informed decisions. So from the start, SAM was oriented towards integrating intangibles into company valuation. But at the time, you did not have all these index providers or extra financial agencies, as we now call them, from which you could buy directly the data and then integrate it in your internal model. So it was not even a choice. We had to ask companies, they, because I joined the company 5 years ago. I was not there when they started it. They had to ask companies, participants to these big international benchmarks about their extra financial practices. That's when Robeco SAM at the time started sending questionnaires to companies to integrate these data directly stemming from companies. That it was not so much of a choice, but you had to go and to reach out directly to companies to get this data at the time. And then we started implementing rankings for indices based on these ESG data, with the belief that this would trigger a virtuous cycle, meaning that companies answering the questionnaire would also be more willing to improve on their ESG practices, and then that the competitors would also then take a look, and that all in all this would lift up the industry practices with regards to their ESG practices. So how do we build an ESG score? So you have this big cycle. Let's start at the center. You have this ESG score, the famous ESG score, the figure that you want, that you need to put in your cooking recipe, and then it will create value. So that's the one. It can be divided into 3 dimensions, ESG. We are okay with using this ESG acronym. It's been so hard to put that in people's minds that we're not going to change it now. Yet, please be aware that as we do nothing like competition with quant, we do nothing like competition with sustainability. We prefer the term of economic dimension instead of governance. Why? Because we tend to think that the governance term is a bit too narrow and a bit too descriptive. Governance addresses the systems, institutions within a company. We like to think of governance as a strategic view, as per a strategic, from a strategic standpoint, meaning that governance should serve the social and environment dimension. This should implement a strategic view as to innovation, as to research and development, and so on. So we're happy to take this ESG stance, but don't be surprised if you ever read or hear about the economic dimension at Robeco SAM. Within these categories, we have different criteria. So in total, we have a set of almost 1,000 data points. Obviously not the same for all sectors, for all companies, but you can drill down and go down further into details from criteria to questions to data points. Maybe some of you know about this questionnaire. We often get blamed for the time it takes for companies to fill that in. We've heard some quite different figures. The average should be between 200 and 400 hours per year to fill the questionnaire. We sometimes heard that it takes a lot more. I'm not going to go into to give you the exact. We try to make that as simple as can be. It's now a web platform, an online questionnaire. You have the help team to help you, a help desk. Yet we are very much aware that it's a lot we ask to companies when they fill out this questionnaire. We try to keep that as relevant as can be, and that's the reason why you can see here that 50% of the questionnaire is industry specific. Concretely, what does that mean? It means that half of the questions are pretty much common to any sector we address, but half of the questionnaire is specific to the industry challenges that we mean to tackle. First, we want the ESG score to be as relevant as can be, but we are also extremely conscious that if we miss the point to companies, they also have to answer dozens of sustainability questionnaires by now. Why would they keep answering our questionnaire, Robeco SAM questionnaire? More than 1,000 companies do every year, and it's still growing. It's growing every year. Why would they do if we do not ask them the questions that really matter to them, that are really what we call material to them? So it's a challenge to build relevant ESG scores, but also to keep some legitimacy and credibility on the market. Maybe someday we will turn into an NGO and we will make that public. No, the information that is provided by companies, we sign NDAs with companies, and it belongs to the companies. So we have no right. Let's say a big automotive manufacturer would be in trouble and yet be well ranked in the corporate sustainability assessment that we carry out. We don't have the right to publish this information. That remains confidential. What we can go out with is scores. And you can, on Bloomberg, type ESG, go, and then you have access to part of the scores for what it's worth, right? It's a score. It's not an assessment. You won't have any qualitative insight with it, but it remains private as we speak. Quite a fairly important point, the small caps versus larger caps. Coming back to what we call materiality, in a nutshell, because we could go really further in depth with this. The principle is to translate the different forms of capital, and I'm back to the fact that a company cannot be deemed only as financials, as financial equity or capital. So it's how you're going to turn the intellectual capital, human capital, social capital into financials, into financial indicators, because in the end, we are not an NGO. We do not give or grant academic prizes. We want to take more informed investment decisions. So all that we ask to companies should be material, because it has to have an impact, and in the investment field, this means financial impact. So this can be translated or applied to growth, to profitability and margins, to capital allocation decisions, capital efficiency, or to the risk profile and the cost of capital for companies. If we go further than that, we will go into more fundamental considerations. That's not what we aim to talk about today, but to give you the broad picture is you turn the total capital of companies into financials. That's the ultimate purpose. This nice drawing is what we call a materiality matrix. We have 60 of them. We have one of them for every subsector we address. I just mentioned that half of the criteria we use to assess companies are specific. Here you have a good example. So how does it work? To us, materiality is two dimensions. It's the likelihood of impact. How likely is it that the criteria, the question you're going to ask makes sense, will have an impact, and the magnitude of the impact. If it's very likely, will it be important? This could be very likely, but not really important. then you're going to find yourself here, very likely, but it will not have an impact. Or you have tail risk, something very important, but it's very likely that it's never going to happen. So what we want to focus on is this. It's what is more likely and potentially more important. In one word, more material. That's really what we want to focus on. And that's where we do have an edge. It's because we send these questionnaires to companies for more than 20 years now. We kind of have a view of what really matters to companies, to financial markets or not. And we make the link with financial performance. Maybe to anticipate on one question, because this was already mentioned this morning. You might think, okay, but you're going to take past returns and evaluate the questions that pertain to the past with past returns. So what's the point? To what extent is that forward-looking? It is because Robeco SAM carries out its own future return assessment and then runs the correlation test between the questions that we ask and these future returns that we anticipate. So it's still assumption. I fully agree with what was said earlier today. It's still hypothesis and assumptions, but it's very important to us to be forward-looking and not only looking at the past, looking backwards when we assess and evaluate materiality. So that's how it works. And you have an example here for the pharma industry. Big pharmas start answering your questions. So we mainly here talk about mega caps most of the time. What did we find really matter for the sector? So first would be product quality and safety. When you produce medicine, it can help that the medicine that you sell to patients is safe, right? So it doesn't hurt. That would be a good selling point, right? And quality, because the competition is harsh. Once you get a license to operate for one medicine for one particular disease, this is key that your medicine offers the best quality because there's only one seat available for a medicine usually. Then innovation management. I'm sorry, it might sound obvious to you that innovation is key for big pharmas, but then is it rightly priced in the balance sheet of a pharma company? Not necessarily. So that's where including ESG criteria helps. Pipeline is key for a big pharma. That may be the key to evaluating a big pharma company. And that's where also you can expand your assessment, the criteria that you're going to use. Maybe that's less intuitive, but we also found via this materiality framework that human capital management is material, is important for pharmas. We often found that the success of big pharmas relied on key people, and also that keeping the best teams within your research and development departments is also key. You might not think, or a purely qualitative assessment may not have led you to this conclusion, but confronting the ESG or extra financial analyst view to this materiality framework had us overweighting or taking into account more substantially this human capital management criteria. I'm not going to go through all criteria. That was just to give you some flavor about it. But on the other hand, you can see that criteria that are yet available, such as customer relationship management, are not really deemed as material. That's intuitively understandable. Big pharmas, they talk to regulators, they talk to scientists, to researchers, to governments, but they do not sell directly to clients. You have pharma benefit manager to run this in the UK. You have some direct selling in the US, direct selling in the UK, but the Roche or Novartis do not go out on the streets and distribute their medicines. If you have a thesis, please let us know. So that's where you, yeah, sorry.
The correlation to the future return is here is getting bigger as higher the magnitude and the likelihood is. Is this applicable to all or to other industries as well, or is?
Absolutely. As I said, we have 60 of these matrices, one for every sub-industry, and it could look totally different. You might not find product quality and safety for other industries, so this might be true for chemicals also, but probably not for purely industrial companies.
But the likelihood and the magnitude of impact is higher, the higher the correlation of the return is.
So is there an example, for instance, where the likelihood and the magnitude are very small, but yet the share price is
No, this cannot be, because by definition, what we mean by impact is financial, impact on financials. So this cannot be. I understand better your question. So what does this lead to? Here are 3 examples this time. So I promised I would stop playing, so please look on the right. You have the concrete outcome and the stance that we take for pharmaceuticals. You see that we take responsibility for it. There's a huge bias, is that to us, our vision of the big pharma field is that environment does not matter so much. It doesn't mean that it does not matter at all. It doesn't mean that this should be completely overlooked. It's just that taking investment decisions is make choices. And we clearly make the choice to underweight the environment dimension because we think otherwise it will be at the expense of some other criteria that we deem as material. Here you see address cost burden, access to drugs, health outcome contribution. If you leave more room for more space to the environment dimension, it means that you have to underweight and then get back to an average view, consensus, some sort of consensus, which is not what we're looking for here. We're looking to take more informed decision, meaning put more weight on what we think is important. So that leads us to really clearly underweight environment. You have other examples here. You see that it's extremely different from minings. Not a surprise for anyone, right? That the environment, the operational eco-efficiency of mining plants is key to evaluating the fundamentals of the sector. So we are not afraid of really moving and adjusting to a large extent the weight that we assign to ESG dimensions. And that's where I'll be answering your questions. These ESG scores, as consistent as can be, they still carry heavy biases. Not even talking about sectors. We talked about the sector differences already. And I think all the markets in total, they do differentiate between sectors. That's quite obvious. Yet, so I'm sorry for the colors, they are wrong, but the raw scores, so to speak, the classic scores are here displayed in orange, and what we call, with a lot of humility, smart scores are in blue. These are Robeco colors, talking about blue team, green team. This is the blue team colors, Dutch colors. So what you see in orange is that there are a lot of biases from geographic, as per geographic areas. ESG scores embed European bias. It always was, it's still the case. European companies generally fare better in as per sustainability criteria. It's also true for market cap, so that's where I'm answering your question. There is a bias towards mega cap, which means that if you take a mainstream ESG score, you are extremely likely to have more European companies and bigger companies. Why is that? The main reason is that they have more resources, they can dedicate more time, and they have more ways to answer properly to questionnaires like ours, or more generally to investors' expectation. It's not only true for ESG, it's also true for financial communication. If you have a dozen of investor relation people, it is more likely that investors in the end will be convinced by your business case, right? So we do recognize that, we identify that, we quantify that. Having said that, what do we do with it? And that's where we opted for the clear-cut choice, which is to call it transparency, and to acknowledge that on the market there is a transparency bias embedded in standard classic ESG scores. So what we do is we unbias it, yet not completely. The same way you could consider that there's a market risk and an idiosyncratic risk. What we try to do is avoid the transparency beta, so to speak, that is embedded within ESG score, but yet to keep the single company risk that is embedded. Otherwise, it would kind of not be fair to put everyone on an absolute level playing field, to put everyone. No, it might be the case that generally European companies fare better with regards to ESG ratings. So we try to differentiate between the premium, so to speak, within ESG risk and the risk that pertains to individual companies. Yes.
With respect to these Robeco SAM scores, how, as a more real-life example, if you have a Robeco strategy that uses Robeco SAM scores, but the investor or the end client actually has a benchmark that uses MSCI ESG scores, how would you bridge that gap that you say you actually invested in the Robeco strategy that has a different weighting in terms of optimization or screening versus the benchmark, and say, okay, what is now, are you better than the benchmark versus the benchmark, or is it different?
So maybe two kind of answers. The first one, as I belong to sales, is I'm going to say to you, buy all scores and drop the name you just mentioned or anyone else. Then we cannot spend our time comparing ourselves to the mainstream. We try to explain why what we do to us makes more sense, but this can totally be applied to a standard benchmark. So you can take any index or benchmark you wish and apply Robeco SAM score.
My question, sorry if I may say, my question will be, what if the could be a pension fund or whoever has MSCI as their standard benchmark provider across the equity lineup and ESG screens in the benchmark. He cannot change the benchmark, right? But he might still want to use your product and compare to their benchmark.
Yeah, exactly. But it still makes sense. We don't pretend that there should be only one view to ESG. And that's also the case for very large universes. That's what I'm going to address right now with the quant background, which by definition includes a lot of stocks and is always relative to a benchmark. We are very fine with the fact that MSCI runs benchmarks and also applies ESG scores on it, and it's totally not incompatible with the fact that you can buy a Robeco SAM or Robeco product, or even use on top or in parallel ESG scores from us. It provides you with a different vision of the world, but we do not dismiss or discard by definition other providers. Then I hope this will fully answer your question. Of course, we look at what they do and what the differences are. And to explain for this, to account for these discrepancies, the answer mainly lies here. It pertains to a transparency bias that either they would not eliminate, I don't know, or not the same way, obviously. But there are differences. Okay. That leads us to quant investing. Don't want to spend too much time also purely on sustainability. What we wanted to address today is also how we implement this, how can we implement this in quant investing, which by definition invests in lots of stocks. A quant fund needs a maximum diversification and therefore, by definition, will include several hundreds of stocks. It's important to differentiate between the two pure approaches. The traditional, so to speak, quant approach will aim most of the time at maximizing the information ratio. Might be the Sharpe ratio for different single factor strategies, but that's what quant is made for, genuinely. You have, on the other end, sustainability investing, with a more values-based or sometimes ethical view with only a sustainability purpose. What we wish to do is neither of those, it's both actually. It's providing attractive information ratio, so good risk-return profile with an appealing sustainability profile. So that's why, and same as the matrix that we showed on ESG, we are looking to providing clients the best SI quality that we can within a stringent risk return profile. And 3 ways we can do this, and I'm going to give further details of these 3 ways in a minute. First is excluding. That's fair and square. You decide what you do not want to do, either activities or sectors, or based on specific criteria. We have the possibility to do anything, but we have standard exclusions that we apply to our sustainable funds, really funds with Robeco or Robeco SAM that are flagged explicitly as sustainability investing. Then you can integrate ESG. That's where you're going to use the ESG scores and this materiality approach I just spent a few minutes on. It means that you integrate ESG either in portfolio construction or in the investment decision itself. And last but not least, you try to generate impact. So this can be from a purely environmental standpoint. This can be based on other criteria. And that's the other tail of the distribution, is you're looking to improve and to generate an impact via your investment decisions. Let's start with exclusion. That's the easiest way. So what we do at Robeco is that within our sustainability funds, quant or not, we decided to exclude some sectors, all the weapons and armament sectors, with a threshold for military contracting, but you can see the number of companies that it's applied to. Tobacco, it was briefly mentioned this morning. All Dutch companies and pension funds pretty much decided during the same period to exclude completely the sector. Let's take this, because this is a case in point. Let me explain why. Why do you exclude? Why would you engage? Why would you look somewhere else? We decided that the tobacco industry could not improve itself as it is, meaning that smoking cigarettes is not good by definition. Sorry for the smokers in the room. Personally, I quit, so I feel very comfortable stating this. But then what can they do? An automotive manufacturer, you can expect from him that he will build cleaner cars and maybe zero carbon cars. It's in their hands. Same with oil and gas companies. What a tobacco company do? So of course they can start launching a tomato sauce new brand, but is it really relating to tobacco? No. So it is our view, and it is widespread in the Netherlands, but also in France, where most insurance companies also excluded tobacco from their investment, that the sector cannot improve. Regardless of the past or future performance, this is an ethical view that we take. It doesn't mean that we think that from today onwards, the tobacco sector will underperform. And then this is another question, outperform or underperform versus what? Because you can exclude, but it also depends where you invest instead. That's where the debate on the performance related to exclusion is not so clear. Same with palm oil. That's a decision we took more recently, this year actually, with a threshold. That's important, also not getting into details, but I'm happy to give further information afterwards. It cannot be always a clear-cut decision. So with tobacco, we don't know any companies producing 5% of tobacco. You do it or you don't. With palm oil, it's slightly different, whether you are certified 100%, 50%. So we're not comfortable excluding all at once and not making it any differentiation. It would not be fair with the industry. So we decided to apply thresholds and to exclude as per these thresholds. Maybe that is something we can review in a few months, in a few years, seeing how things evolve. Same with coal. We exclude coal, thermal coal, but we do have some thresholds because you cannot always expect from companies that they will sell or get rid of their thermal coal power plants all at once. This would only be looking somewhere else. They can always sell it to someone else that we have it run at full speed. So that's where exclusion is simple, is straightforward, but it's also sometimes not only black and white. Second is integrating ESG criteria among quant factors. So at Robeco, we also have our own vision of the world, not only with ESG, but also with factors, meaning that we will not use factors as they are defined by the name that was already mentioned or by any other provider, as good as they are. We have dozens of quant researchers that for years have been looking into the definitions on what could be deemed as an investment factor. In our vision of the world, we have 4 of them. This is not the exact Lovell is missing here. So what we do in that context, in quant investing, is that we mix the ESG signal that, as per the materiality principle that I just mentioned, so that's pretty much unbiased, and that's very important for quant managers to know that if they're going to add some factors, some information to their models, it's not going to bring any undesired bias. Otherwise, it would not be worth doing it. It's not their model anymore. So that's because of this stringent materiality approach that we take on ESG, that these quant portfolio managers are confident that it can bring value to Robeco's own definition of the value factor, the quality factor, momentum, or analyst revision. And that's how we integrate ESG, is by defining our rankings, not only as per these traditional financial factors, but adding ESG to it. Maybe for the sake of time, I'm going through this quite fast, but please, if you have any question in the end, let me know. So you see that on the left, we have these ESG rankings. Then we also have all these factors with several hundreds of data points here again underneath. I cannot give you weights, or when you join Robeco, you have to make the pledge that you're never going to reveal the weights or recipes of the core quant strategies and how much we weight this or that. That's absolutely secret. The outcome and main takeaway is that we come to a ranking. And that's where our portfolio construction will start. We will decide to invest or not, to overweight or to underweight, as per this ranking that combines ESG and purely financial quantitative data. What's the difference between, again, a traditional fund and a quant fund that's going to integrate sustainability? For example, is that sometimes you're not going to be able to invest or to overweight some stocks. 2 examples. You're not allowed to overweight stocks belonging to the last 2 quintiles of the rankings, meaning the bottom 40%, you're not able to overweight. And that is important, because in an enhanced indexing approach, where you have a very limited risk budget, sometimes less than 1% tracking error, it does have an impact not to be able to overweight a stock that would be interesting from a purely financial standpoint. This you cannot do. Also, something else you cannot do is overweight a company if Robeco is engaging as per Global Compact breaches investigation, what we call enhanced engagement. This also you're not allowed to do. So it's all this set of rules, not to say constraints, that make the difference, and that allows you not only to maximize the risk-return profile of a quant portfolio, but also, in addition, and not at the expense of this risk-return ratio, reach optimal ESG sustainability quality. So what does it give in reality? You have the 3 ESG dimensions that I mentioned before here. In black, the black line is the benchmark, the MSCI World developed in that case, so was 1,600 stocks approximately. You see that it's rather well distributed around the median, so around 50, which also makes sense. And in green is the quant portfolio. So it's, in that case, an enhanced indexing strategy, meaning with very limited bets versus the index. You can see that we have the objective to reach a 20% higher ESG score than the index. With another constraint is that we need to have 10% more on each ESG dimension. Why is that? Simply because we don't want to be very good on the environmental dimension and that it is carried out at the expense of the other scores. Otherwise, it would lead the portfolio manager to tweak the ranking or the portfolio, the investment decisions towards one criteria in particular or one question, and that would not be in the interest in the end of the risk return profile. So we try to have this balanced approach with a 20% target overall, but also a 10% on each dimension. And last, I mentioned impact. So what do we call impact in that case? The environmental impact approach that we take, and here again the source is 100% Robeco SAM, is that we look at 4 different indicators pertaining to environmental footprint. Greenhouse gases, so mainly CO2, not expanding here, but to us that's not enough. Just simply considering that a fund is low carbon is not enough. It's useful for us to also look at energy consumption, water use, and waste generation. And with these 4 metrics, you can have a better view on what the global footprint of a company is. Why is that? Let me give you a very simple example with the mining sector. You might think that the mining sector is a big CO2 emitter. It's not completely wrong, but they also use a lot of water, which oil and gas companies don't, except when they're fracking. So just limiting the environmental footprint of the mining companies to its CO2 emissions is a bit misleading. Better to also take a more balanced approach and look at the water that they use in their mining plants. And there you can judge better and evaluate financially better the risk, physical risk, transition risk of such companies. So we take these 4 indicators, and here again we have a target to have emissions or global footprints 20% below the index, again with limited risk budgets. That's the challenge and the beauty of it. Coming back to what we were saying, when you optimize the environmental impact, you look backwards. You take data that you may have gotten last year and that the companies reported on the year before. So only taking environmental metrics, these metrics into account, clearly takes you backwards. That's why having ESG scores and sending questionnaires to companies about their policy, their operational eco-efficiency, their climate strategy, enables you to add qualitative and forward-looking criteria to it and have a better view, because the worst in class today, an oil and gas company, also probably holds the keys to be a best in class tomorrow. If they invest, if they want to improve. So it doesn't mean that because you have bad figures today, you're going to remain the worst in class tomorrow. That's the trap, with the pitfall we wish to avoid by combining environmental data, but also more prospective ESG criteria. And the last point I would like to address in the quant investment context is engagement. It was already discussed this morning. We have a team of 12 people based in Rotterdam. It's very much in the Dutch culture to have direct dialogue. It's true between individuals. My colleagues and I can certify. It's also true between shareholders and companies, including pension funds. There is a very open and straightforward, not to say more, dialogue between different parties. Therefore, engagement, active ownership is very much anchored within Dutch culture, and it's a tool, a lever that we use extensively in our sustainability approach. To it, there's a special role for engagement within quant management, because it's pretty hard to justify in a fundamental portfolio. You will hold 40 to 60 stocks, but do you really want to hold a company you need to engage with? Because by definition, it means that something's wrong. So it means if you do invest, it means that you identified a catalyst, a bit like a value investor in financial terms, and that you're confident that you can have an influence and improve things to ultimately improve the value of the company. In a quant portfolio context, you don't ask yourself this question. Quant investing aims at reaching a target, an objective. Let's not discuss so much about the means. It's respecting a risk, an information ratio, for instance. Then will you invest or not in this or that company? I wouldn't say it does not really matter, but it's not the purpose for it. So you invest in sectors you would probably not go to in more fundamentally driven processes. And these quant portfolios give you the opportunity to hold these stocks. And once you hold these stocks, then you have the legitimacy, the credibility to engage and say, we are shareholders. We identified this or that shortcoming or weakness in your ESG profile, and we wish to discuss that with you. So that's where quant investing is very useful next to fixed income portfolios, to more fundamentally driven processes, equity portfolios, processes, to engage with companies. So to wrap up, you see that there are many ways we can integrate ESG in quant portfolios. I want to insist first on what I just mentioned, is that with quant, the beauty of quant is that you have an objective in mind more than just adding a safety belt. You're going to think of where you want to go. And so only taking one of these approaches separately will not necessarily make sense. If you only exclude, fine, but then what you do next? If you only integrate ESG, that's also fine, but if the investment universe is not constrained, or if you do not assign yourself precise objectives, you run the risk of having no concrete effect to it. So to us, it's the combination of all these approaches: engagement, environmental impact, ESG integration, exclusion, that makes a consistent sustainability approach in quant investing. And we are lucky enough to have internally these research teams at Robeco Sam in Zurich, being experts with this experience of analyzing companies under the ESG angle, and with this materiality framework that matches very well with a quant investing approach. So it's really a global approach you should take, and avoid only picking ESG approaches with very large portfolios that you will get with quant investing.
So 5 minutes left, I think perfect time. Are there any questions from the audience?
So in principle, you're right. You should hold the maximum of stocks if you want to have an influence. Please allow myself to name BlackRock. It was extensively named this morning. That's why I would do. Robeco, in total, we run, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, Thierry, 65 billion in quant equities. We're very happy. We hope this will still grow. But underweighting a stock within these 65 billion, I'm afraid, will not change much. But your question makes more sense for such a large asset manager I just mentioned. Within ETFs, within quant portfolios, indeed, if you tilt a bit less towards low weights, your participation, this might have an impact. Another answer to this would be not staying alone. Then if you're afraid that you will not hold enough of shares within a companies, then reach out to pension funds, to your competitors, to the PRIs or any other association, and collaborate. And that's what we do a lot at Robeco. We like a lot the collaborative engagement in the context of the PRIs. We never hesitate to talk to our competitors, which in that case are no longer competitors. We all have a common goal, either to take the lead of these investment groups or simply to participate and bring our assets to different endeavors. And that's especially the case in the Climate Action 100 Plus that some of you may have heard of. That is a collaborative engagement, which means that of the, I think, 300 participants, it's recorded, so I hope that's a fair estimation. Every asset management company take the lead for on a certain number of targets. I think in our case, it's less than 10, where we are on the lead on behalf of the Climate Action 100. So to circumvent what you just mentioned, we collaborate.
Yeah, I have a question to how you generate your ESG score. It's obviously survey-based, and you apply the fact that large companies are more versed in communicating about ESG factors. But isn't it that over time, even the smaller or medium companies will get better? So the people that fill in the surveys, they know exactly what you would like to hear in order to get a better score. So in a couple of years' time, with ESG becoming more prominent, even for smaller companies, is the materiality or the meaningfulness of the score just going to be coming to a point of diminishing returns?
Yeah, and that's what you say about companies. It's also true for questions, meaning what we see is we have some kind of J-curve effect, that if we ask a question for the first time, answers are not always as good as they should be, either because companies did not expect it, or they didn't take the time to properly answer, or we may be a bit too early, regulation-wise, innovation-wise, and it tends to improve then over time. And then once the question is there for quite a while, we send it out to companies. We do some advisory with companies. Some big firms also do. So after a few years, a question, let's say that we raise first, might happen, becomes public. It's commoditized. And then we no longer are, it's no longer specific to us. So you can also see it from this way, and you're right, a company then reaches another level. But the market changes make that you cannot really identify or isolate a market trend towards more transparency and better quality. It's expanding, but you have also more and more lesser market cap, with lower market cap companies. So all in all, you do not really see a change.
And how do you make sure that what a company writes in the survey actually holds up in the real world? Meaning, they talk the talk, they walk the walk.
Sorry, I didn't get it. How do we make sure that what they say to us, they actually do?
The survey is actually how they behave in the real world.
Yeah. We had several cases. We ask for evidences. It's evidence-based, meaning that when we ask for figures in a table, we do ask where it comes from and, if possible, the source. And that's why we sign non-disclosure agreements with companies. That's to get this extra information they would sometimes not put in a sustainability report that is public. Then, should a company decide to put wrong information in the questionnaire, what can we do? It's not up to us. We are not auditors. And it is generally our view that going on site and visiting companies to check, for reality check, would not always help. And some of the issues we saw in industries like the automotive industry, these companies, including auditors, were controlled. There was a regulation in place, and yet a fraud, because it turned out to be a fraud, was discovered. So we are not sure, to really answer your question, even if we would carry out audits on site, and that it would not be 100% insurance that they walk the talk.
But you do analyze maybe the questions between the lines, the answers to the questions also between the lines, so not purely face value.
We try as much as often as possible to let the companies comment. The thing is, if we do that too much, then they will also blame us for having a too heavy questionnaire. We try to find a good balance between quantitative data, a common framework, and still some room for explanations. But it's really not easy to find.
I've got a third last one. You say you have the NDAs in place with the companies that you survey. But obviously, if what they disclose in the survey is material, so it's a bit of a conflict there. They can't disclose anything that's material to their share price just to a single party that will give you unjustified advantage over the other place. So if they tell you, oh, by the way, we're doing this and that, you decide it's material, but they won't give the same information to other shareholders or BlackRock or whoever.
So we come to the non-material information, public information in the CFA context. What strikes me in your question is why unjustified? Why would it be unjustified? We are asking a question to a company. It's not like we would invite a company to dinner. Then, oh, by the way, how do you fare with it? We do ask questions. Maybe other extra financial agencies, index providers, could also do the same. Then this cannot become public. Otherwise, we would simply not get this information. Having said that, we have an audit of the process, an external audit. We keep the information for ourselves. It belongs to the company, so we do not disclose it. And we apply these changes. And there's a Chinese wall between the people responsible for the questionnaire and the investment teams. It's not released. It's all released at the same time. It's public also because we have partnerships with index providers, for instance, S&P, not to name them. And it's all going public at the same time and to everywhere clients as all external parties. So it's not like we would hold private information, use it for ourselves or disseminate it. That is indeed an issue we are very much aware of. And we have, I think, everything in place to ensure that we do have proper governance with this regard.
So in a way, what you say is that the investors only see the percentage, the score, but not the answer to the question.
Yeah, we released the first results of our corporate sustainability assessment in the context of what is called DJSI, because that's the name of the indices that are run as per these rankings. And it's released publicly mid-September every year to everyone at once with the same level of information. That's what we mean. So we don't keep things for ourselves that we would use. And when we propose scores to external parties, it's the same scores that we use internally. There's not a Robeco SAM score that we would use with some information and some different scores that we would make public or proposed even if some clients pay. It's the exact same.
Do you see performance-wise better performance from companies even had ESG scores becoming better and better, or do you see any?
Yeah, you mean the trend effect? We do, it's embedded indeed in the ESG scores because we also ask forward-looking questions and we do look, yes, we do see that. Then I think we are not the best to answer this question because we do take performance into account in the definition of the questionnaire. So by definition, we will find better companies. To properly answer the question, it would probably be better not to take this into account, take ESG score and do the correlation ex post on those.
It's a great final question as well, taking into account the title of the conference being ESG investing. Does it work or is it critical? Because ultimately what you do want to see, of course, with the ESG investing is that companies do show some improvement in their behavior. Or that your returns are high, and preferably to show both, of course. and I think the product might or the process might be able to do so. And I thank you very much for the presentation and sharing this process and philosophy with us, and also for you, there's something to drink on the way back.